Air with Jim Spock and Bob Butts on WAAT Radio, 750 AM on your dial. And our special guest this morning, we'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Daria Brezinski of Earth Heart Foundation.
Thank you.
Welcome, Daria.
Thanks, Jim.
And
Thanks,
of
Bob.
course, you were a guest on our show just about a month ago talking
Yes.
about education and children's issues, and you've spent over the last 20 plus years doing research on schools, children, education, and the most effective ways to educate a child, teach a child, help a child to learn and grow. And you're now working on a book.
Yes,
about
it's
all
called
that.
Education in the 21st Century, Whole Child Learning. What I did was brought together 20 authors, each of whom have their own expertise, and not just in education. We have a physicist from the Pentagon and holistic health practitioners like a naturopathic physician, chiropractors, as well as educators who have been in the education business. We have 4 superintendents, a director of human services, and we're all putting together a book on how we can look at children in a whole perspective rather than the bits and pieces that we normally do in education. What we've discovered is that we've been dealing mostly in education. We talk about hemispheric preference. In other words, the brain is set up in 2 different sides, the right and left hemisphere, and this is what we've known and understood for many years. However, in the last 20 years, we've also discovered that there's another part of the brain. It's called the triune brain, which was discovered by Carl Pribram from Stanford University. And in this aspect, there are 3 different parts: the primal brain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Now, basically, education we've known that there are many domains that we can reach. The affective domain, which virtually is the right brain, and that includes things like our emotions, our feelings, imagination, intuition, receptivity. And then there's the cognitive domain, which is the left side of the brain, which is intelligence, intellect, rational thinking. And of course we have the psychomotor, which means the part that we move around. But we've really never looked at these 3 aspects of the brain, which is something that we must look at. Dr. Carl Pribram has also discovered that brain is like a hologram. Most people don't even know what a hologram is. I'm sure you've seen them in the stores, the pictures of a hologram. And a hologram is made, I'll give you a simplistic view. If we take 3 rocks and we throw them in a pond, and all of a sudden something freezes that moment in time, and then we cut it out, the ice, and we look at it and put it up to a light, what we will actually see is the whole totality of the rock. Now, it takes 2 processes. First, you have to freeze the surface, and then you have to put it in front of a light source. Well, that's basically how a hologram is produced. There's beam splitters and other things that are involved, but that's a simplistic view. Well, this is how the mind works as well. We take information into our brain, and it sets up holographic images. And in order to be able to tap into those images, we have to have a light source. Now, this all sounds very scientific, but in reality, but what Bob was talking about a little earlier with regard to relationships, that is how we find and locate the holograms we've created in our life, through relationships with people. And this is something that we've never really looked at in education before, and something that we really need to look at, because relationships are extraordinarily important. People have answers to our questions. People often, for example, if you're angry or agitated at somebody, generally what you're looking at is somebody who's reflecting something about yourself you really don't want to look at yourself. And rather than getting angry, we need to get introspective. We very rarely teach children skills in terms of interpersonal skills in schools, for example. How to cope with stress is a number 1 issue. What do we do instead of helping children to cope with stress and give them skills in terms of stress is that we give them a pill. We might give them Ritalin or other kinds of antidepressant drugs. Instead of being depressed and teaching them how to be depressed in this world, we pop a pill or do other kinds, put them into mental hospitals, instead of giving them the kinds of coping skills that they need for everyday life. A gentleman, I can't remember who said this, but I remember it being anonymous or something. 90% of it doesn't matter what happens to us in life. It's what we do with what happens to us that makes the difference. And there's always going to be stress in life, and there's always going to be negative things that happen to us in life, but we generally don't help children to deal with those kinds of stresses. What basically we tell them to do is to deny them. And I have a very strong feeling that a lot of our illnesses in life have to do with the fact that we don't help children deal with the kinds of issues that they need to deal with in life. I read a study the other day that tells us about many of the children, and we just had one this weekend, two 11-year-old teens twins who killed their parents, sister, and other friends. And what they don't tell you on the news is these are two children who are coming down off of antidepressant drugs.
Did you see that magazine we have on, and what they're saying in there, that most of these acts of violence are being committed by children who are on psychotic drugs?
Yes, and that's absolutely true. What happens is that rather than teaching the children how to deal with their emotions, their pain, their hurt, we give them pills to depress that, and it's like a pressure cooker. It boils and boils and builds and builds and builds until finally one day they explode in inappropriate ways because they haven't been taught appropriate ways to do so.
And then we go and throw them in prison as a solution. We're going to get them and we're going to try them like adults.
Well, and another problem with that is that prisons are another issue. I discovered that in the state of Pennsylvania, you spend $23,000 to $28,000 a year housing prisoners. The ages are 14 to 80. I was talking to prison officials several weeks ago who told me the 14-year-olds who used to come in about 5 years ago were petrified, afraid, and remorseful at the kinds of things they were doing. The 14-year-olds who come in today are proud. And we need to really look at many things in our civilization, why something like that would occur. We also,
Can I say,
sure.
address that? Some time ago, I used to do a program on ward, and I can't remember the lady, but she deals with children without conscience. And they found that the less a child is nurtured, the less a child is held and loved, the less conscience they're going to have. And of course, we've created a society where both parents are working, and they're not getting that nurturing. In the meantime, we're blaming the children. Instead of providing a safe world, as Al Rendy would say, for the children, we're providing a world that predisposes to all these problems.
Nurturing in utero is very, very significant. What we have discovered, and we often dismiss this kind of information because we don't want to look at it, but nurturing for children in utero, we have now discovered, is absolutely critical. There is a great deal of research going on right now with the human brain and in utero of children. There are children who are being born today who are beyond genius. And we are doing studies on these children to find out why they are so incredibly intelligent. And what we're finding is in utero, when the child has an environment where the mother is happy, where the mother feels safe, where she feels secure and feels good about her pregnancy, where she takes care of herself, these are children who are being born happy, content, and also with a great awareness of morals and values because they feel very safe and anchored in the world. We are the children who, in the past 2 or 3 generations in this country, who have been taken away from their parents at birth, put into daycare centers, put in front of television, and I'm talking about Sesame Street and all the other kinds of television program, and used as babysitters. We are finding that the bonding relationship between parent and child and the nurturing relationship have been severed. That also has to do with many of the way we birth children in this country unnaturally by cesarean section and inducing the mother rather than having the child been born naturally. And the mothers who are not nursing their children. This also has a great deal to do with stimulating the 52 points in the brain that will develop conscience in the future. It has to do with the limbic system, the midbrain. So there are many things in this country that we need to I think it's so wonderful seeing mothers these days who are nursing their children without fear of disgrace or and places for mothers in stores and all areas of the population and the community. What we've done is we've allowed corporate America to tell us how to birth, how to carry our children, how to nurture them, and how to raise them. And we've literally created a society of children who are isolated, alone, and frightened. And this absolutely promotes children who don't have conscience.
You mentioned about the three areas of the brain. I just thought, if you just concentrate on one area or even two areas, it's like trying to build a stool with one or two legs. It doesn't work. It's not going to be very stable. So as a result, we end up with children who are unstable. And what do? We blame the children.
Exactly.
And instead of, I think the word blame almost has to be stricken from the dictionary, and let's take responsibility, all of us. It's not they who are responsible, but we must be responsible.
Well, I always use the analogy of a factory worker. A factory worker stands on the assembly line and watches a product come through that's not that's broken or there's something wrong with it. Does the factory worker blame the machine, or does it blame the product? Of course we don't blame the product. That would be absolutely insane. And they go back and get the machine repaired, and if the machine keeps breaking down, they get a brand new machine. Well, I equate that to education.
Wow.
We keep blaming the product, which is our children, instead of the machine itself, which is our education system. We know today, and we have known since the 1940s, that our educational system does not work. There was a 8-year study done it was published in 1943, but it was politically incorrect because that was the time of our World War. And what it was done on 3,700 students, high school students. They were tracked from freshmen for 8 years, from freshman in high school all the way through college. And 30 major colleges and universities and 30 high schools were asked to drop the 5-core curriculum and the 120 credit hours to determine whether or not this was officially what schools should do for college success. Now, the 5-core curriculum come from the 1800s. That's how far back our educational system comes from. And that was determined by several colleges and university presidents who decided, they were called the Committee of 12, they got together and decided that we needed something standardized for children who were entering colleges. In that time, for example, in the 1800s, when students, which was only 15% of the population who went to college, what they would do was sometimes they had 10 years of Greek and 3 years of English, and others would have 3 years of Greek and 10 years of English. So they needed a standard way to determine who would be successful in college. So they came up with a 5-core curriculum. No scientific research, no documentation, just out of the clear blue, we came up with 5-core curriculum, which is English, mathematics, social studies, language arts, and science. And then several years later, in 1903, they got together again and decided that it takes 120 credit hours to learn these subjects. Now, of course, we all know it takes 120 credit hours to learn subjects. Not 60, not 140, but 120. So our absurd notions from 100 years ago are still, if we take out technology in our curriculum today, all of the curriculum in America is from the 1920s. What we've discovered in successful schools is that they throw out the 5-core curriculum, which is what many studies have found, and they throw out the 120 credit units and use time differently and use subject matter differently. If we look at and as an example, if we look at the technology we have today, you have to combine mathematics, science, English, and a number of other subjects in order to be able to learn to use the computer effectively. So if we know that about technology, why aren't we incorporating it into our schools? And the reason is because institutions have become so structured that they can't shift fast enough to be able to incorporate what happens in the world, in the marketing world, fast enough to keep up with. I've been in school districts where the textbooks literally are from the 1950s. So we are teaching 1950s information to children in in an age where it takes there's an 18-month turnover in technology. So a child who is graduating from a 2-year institution has literally obsolete skills by the time they graduate in technology.
Wow. You know, it just reminds me of the things you're saying. I just compare this with going bowling. You're going to go bowling, but we're going to go bowling for X number of years, but we're never going to see the pins. We're never going to know how many we knocked down. So we can't relate it. We're getting information, but we can't relate it to anything. But when we take information and we can relate it to something, well, then it gets to be interesting and then to be fun.
Well, what most people don't understand is the chopped up curriculum that we have comes from 1717, from Prussia in the era of Catherine the Great, and it was designed to develop good citizens, soldiers, and factory workers. The chopped up system literally does not allow for critical thinking to occur, and they did it purposefully. Now the major issue that schools want are critical thinkers. Critical thinking comes from being able to integrate many different subject matters simultaneously in depth. We have a shopping mall mentality in our schools. We try to enforce all kinds of information on our children when it's totally irrelevant and inappropriate. When they can open up the computer and pick it off the computer instantly. What we need to teach children is depth, how to find information, what kinds of questions to ask, where to go for information.
It's exactly what Albert Einstein said.
Exactly. Anything I'm saying has not been said has already been said before. Maria Montessori had the answers. Rudolf Steiner had the answers. John Dewey had the answers. Many people had the answers, and unfortunately, what I find extraordinarily intriguing is that we constantly complain that if we don't have scientific documentation, we need not do things in our schools, and it's totally inappropriate unless we have scientific basis. And yet, everything in our schools does not have scientific backing or statistical longitudinal studies. For example, we put the technology of the computer in the classroom. Now, has anybody studied what effects the computer has on the brain for young children? Well, there are several people who are doing it now, and the findings are extraordinary. We put televisions in the classrooms, and what happened to our children? Well, they became television viewers and videotape viewers. What we learned from this experience, and I talk about a real interesting phenomenon. It began to happen in the schools in the late 1940s. The Dairy and Cattlemen's Association decided they were going to do a multi-billion-dollar, at this time it's multi-billion-dollar, it was a multi-million-dollar marketing strategy. And what they did was they took and made information for teachers. You remember the big chart that said the food groups, that you had to drink 3 glasses of milk a day and eat 3 pieces of meat a day? No scientific basis, no scientific data attached to it, but a very clever marketing strategy. What happened was that the schools adopted everything. They took the booklets the Farming Association had, they took all the information, they put up the posters, children were taken to farms and had free ice cream at the end. What this did was, the marketing strategy behind this that we now know is that the corporations were trying to create lifelong consumers. So our schools have been used for corporate ends. They know that when children begin to use a product at early ages, they then become lifelong consumers. Here we are in nearly close to 2000, 50 years later, and we're finding out that perhaps 3 glasses of milk a day and red meat 3 times a day is not the most appropriate way of living a healthy lifestyle. And of course, we know it to be true from many other cultures and many other areas.
And what happens is, and everything becomes a business, and anybody in a business focuses on where they make their living. And as long as we're separate, as long as we are illiterate in human relations, this thing is going to continue to get worse. I have never known what happiness really was, the depth of it, until we got involved in public service. That is such a blast and so much fun, and you could never, ever have this much fun taking people's money. And it's like you're constantly giving, and that's why we're here. And I could not describe the feelings that I personally receive in dealing with people and literally talking to people I've never met over the phone, and literally become like we've known them. I've known them all my life, and it's like you're giving phone hugs, because the interaction between people is so incredible, because everybody's so incredible in their own way, and we're depriving ourselves of that because we've been conditioned the same way to thinking success is having things, and how much is enough? 10% more. But I'm caught up in the same thing, in that success with the things that we're doing is being able to help 10% more people. And that is fun. The side effects are terrific. It becomes absolutely contagious. But if people have never experienced it, it's a very difficult thing to describe. We're told, contribute money. No, that doesn't work. It's when you contribute feelings in yourself. That creates a magic in your life, and that is just the most exciting thing imaginable. That is greater than the water cure or anything else, because, life is about life. Life is not about things.
You have just touched on an interesting subject, because the key to education is, today we have what we might call a control model. What we need to get to is a service model. When we alter the way we think about how we relate to children, and to serve them rather than trying to control them, then we will find the answer to helping our children to become better human beings. And the system has been set up for so long, for the last 100 years, that it's almost an impenetrable force to penetrate in order to be able to change people. It's very difficult for people to change in terms of thinking of serving people instead of controlling them. And there are only a few handful people who really understand that concept. And it's a very difficult one to learn, because most people want to think they are in control rather than allowing things to, and they don't trust in the nature of children to be able to learn. Children learn no matter what, as long as we give them the opportunity and the environment for learning. And we do that by serving them. We listen to them. That's one of the major issues in service, is to learn to listen. And we never listen to children. We think we listen, but we really don't. When children, for example, my youngest daughter, she was about 5 years old. And we were on our way to do errands on a Saturday. It was going to take us about 6 hours doing errands all over town, grocery shopping. Before we got into the car, she said, "I'm going to learn to read today." And I said, she was the youngest of 6, and I said...
How old was she at this time?
5.
5 years old.
And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes, now." And I said, "Okay." So we went, right before we went for our errands, we went to the library. She said, "I don't want a picture book, I want a word book, because I really want to learn to read." So after having taught all the other children, I knew exactly what book to pick out, and I took the book out of the library.
Which book was it?
Oh, I can't remember the title at this point.
But it was not a picture book.
It was not a picture book.
What's that reader book you're talking about? It starts with an M?
Macmillan?
No, McGreeders or something?
McGuffey.
McGuffey.
That was from the 1800s. But anyway, so we took the book out of the library, and we began driving around town, and when she didn't know the words, she would ask. By the time we got home, after 6 hours, she was able to read the entire book. And she came into the house proclaiming her majesty and said, I can now read, everyone. I can read, and there's no pictures, and I know the pages. That's the key to service, to learn to listen when a child tells you that they are ready. She did the same thing with learning how to ride a bike, sewing on the sewing machine. And of course, it took me 6 children to finally figure out to learn how to listen to them, and that they knew when they needed to learn whatever they needed to learn. And I found this with children everywhere. One of the things I had to do to get a Montessori certificate was to observe children for 2 years in silence. We had to write down everything we saw and heard. And one of the things that I marveled at was the fact that children already knew. All we had to do was point out to them what they already knew. The teacher at one point was going to teach the children about democracy. And I had heard her she told me all about what was going to happen in the class. And she walked out of the room at lunchtime, and I sat with the children. And here they were sharing their lunches with each other. These were 5 to 7-year-olds, sharing their lunches with each other, collaborating on going to the water fountain. So they did this all by themselves, deciding who was going to go to the water fountain so that there wasn't a line, who was going to go to the bathroom. I never said a word. And here was an opportunity of a lifetime to point out democracy in action. And after lunch, the teacher stood up in front of the room and began to recite all the principles of democracy, and she had missed a grand opportunity because it was right there in action. And that's what children need, the opportunity to, when we serve children and when we listen to them rather than thinking that we know what they need to learn, that is when change occurs. I had my greatest experience in this, learning the difference between serving and control, was an airplane ride I took from California to the East Coast. It was a red eye. You know what a red eye is. Everybody wants to sleep on the red eye. And it's about a 6.5-hour ride from California to the East Coast. And I got in and sat down in my seat, and there was a seat vacant next to me. And the plane was about ready to take off when a woman came in and sat down beside me. And she put her head down, and everybody was getting ready with their pillows and blankets, and I was going to work as soon as I got to the East Coast, so I also wanted to sleep as well. After she sat down, in waddled in her 5 children under the age of 10. And already I could feel the tension mount in the plane, because they began fighting in the aisles, they were throwing things, they were grabbing people's newspapers, and generally very disruptive. And the energy in the plane began to escalate before it ever took off. What happened was that I was going to be the educator that I am and the control person that I am and take control of the situation. So I turned to her and said, "Ma'am, could you please control your children? They are really disrupting everyone on the plane, or I will gladly help you in that regard." Because I was into controls, I never looked to see what the reality of the situation was. And when she picked up her head, her eyes were all red. She had been crying. And she turned to me and said, "I'm really sorry. My husband and I came here from the East Coast to be on vacation with our children. And he was playing on the sand, building a sand castle with the children. A wave came along, hit him in the back of the neck, and killed him." I had an instant paradigm shift. I went from a control model to a serving model. And I said, "I'm terribly sorry. I'd like to help you out, and we'd all like to help you out on this plane." And I stood up, and in the loudest voice I possibly could, I talked to the stewardess, and of course everybody on the airplane heard me. And for the most part, they shifted their paradigm, and they became serving to those children. They read to them, they tried to take care of them and to console the mother. And that is what we need in education today. We need to take a shift in the way we see situations. Children come to us broken. They're from broken homes. They're from divorced parents, from abusive parents. And we treat them not as human beings and humanely, but as numbers and as names coming through the door. One of the major things we need to do is to change the way we see children and to see them humanely as children who are open to the world and happy. I marvel at what happens when a baby walks through a door. When a baby walks through the door, it gets everyone's immediate attention because a baby is whole and is close to God and is bright and alive. And yet I see that same child a year after it's come to school, and all of a sudden that light and that energy and that magnetism is gone. And I ask myself, what do we do in schools to take it away? What we need to do is enhance it.
I believe it was Peel Organization was part of a study or involved in a study with the Kellogg, I think the Kellogg Foundation, and they found that in second grade something like 85% of the children had high self-esteem, and by 5th grade 80% had lost it.
Yes, and it has much to do with the way, again, part of what education does, it only deals with a very small portion of the left side of the brain, when there is so very much more that we need to deal with. Children do not learn by sitting in a classroom with a textbook, listening to a teacher. Children learn by integration and becoming actively involved in the process.
Can I ask you, that story you told about on the plane, did you relay that personally to the chicken soup people? Didn't I see that in the book?
No.
No? Well, it certainly should be.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Just want to remind our listeners we're talking with Dr. Daria Brezinski of the Earth Heart Foundation. This is Positive Press on the Air with Jim Spock and Bob Butts, and we'll be right back in 1 minute, right after this word.
He walks in the treetop all day long, hopping and a-bopping and a-singing his song. All the little birdies on the Jaybird Street love to hear the robin so sweet, sweet, sweet. Rockin' Robin, rockin' Robin, rockin' Robin, 'cause we're really gonna rock tonight, night. Every little swallow, every chicken feed.
There's nothing wrong with reusing good material. So the next time you go shopping, buy stuff you can reuse. You create less waste, reduce pollution, and save energy and resources. Not to mention, come off sounding very cool.
Rockin' Robin, rockin' Robin.
Buy smart, waste less, save more.
Go rockin' Robin, 'cause we're really gonna rock tonight.
For a free shopping guide, call 1-800-CALL-EDF. A message from the Ad Council and the Environmental Defense Fund.
Hello, shoppers. Welcome to Shop Wrong. Check out today's circular for all the damage you can do to the environment. On aisle 6, pick up a serving of air pollution. On aisle 2, we're offering a special on strip mining. Deplete double the natural resources with our special in-store coupon.
Every time you go shopping, you have a choice. Buy products made with too much packaging, but then you're buying trash. Or shop smart by buying products in bulk, avoiding those single serves, and replacing disposables with things you can reuse, which saves energy, natural resources, and means less pollution.
Excuse me, where can I find the water pollution section?
We stock that on aisle 7.
Thank you.
Buy smart, waste less, save more.
For more information, call 1-800-CALL-EDF. A message from the Ad Council and the Environmental Defense Fund.
Hi, I'm Joanne Woodward. Ever notice how many things in life happen in a circle? The seasons, revolving credit, hula hoops, the spinning of the circle we call Earth, and recycling. Together we've already made a difference. Sorting glass, plastic, separating cans, stacking newspapers. Now there are lots of products made from things we've already recycled. A paperclip, in a more daring life, a 56 convertible, a cereal box, once your Sunday paper. It all goes back to the circle. It starts when we recycle trash at home and at work. It's completed when we buy products made from recycled materials. How do you know the difference? Check the label for something called post-consumer recycled content. Then buy the highest percentage of it you can find. You'll save a tree, you'll save energy, and in your own way, you'll help save the world. Complete the circle.
For your free Buy Recycled shopping guide, call 1-800-CALL-EDF, brought to you by the Ad Council and EDF, the Environmental Defense Fund.
Okay, we are back live on the air here on Positive Press on the Air, WAAT Radio, 750 AM on your dial. This is Jim Spock with Bob Butts, and our special guest today, Dr. Daria Brezinski of the Earth Heart Foundation, talking about children and education and the need for educational reform and the research she's done in the area of working with children and the educational systems in our society. And just want to announce that, okay, Bob, you just dashed out of the studio and dashed right back in, and you're huffing and puffing.
The 100-yard dash.
But now we wanted to mention to our listeners that starting on next Tuesday, and every Tuesday for the foreseeable future, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., Dr. Daria Brezinski is going to be hosting her own Tuesday morning show right here called Children Come First.
Actually, exactly. We'd also like to hear from any of our listeners that may have questions. I'd like to be able to hear from the listening audience and find out what kinds of questions they might have or any interesting comments they might have. Our number here is 570-457-7464. If you'd like to call in, you'll be receiving the CK Auto operator who will be answering the line, so she will place you on hold and then we'll patch you through to the radio program. Again, the call-in number here, if you have any questions, is 570-457-7464.
And as Daria had said, the CK Auto operator will pick up and just tell her that you want to be put through to the radio show, and she'll put you right through to our line right here in the studio.
It's on extension 211 in case somebody's switching operators at the time. At any rate, I'm listening to all this, and of course I've always enjoyed hearing you speak. It comes down to, if I could think of one thing I'd assign in the classroom, or even at the entrance to the school, something to the effect, whatever message we give the children, the message is love.
Yes.
And that should be the foundation. At very least, it should be minimal, unconditional respect, because if we want to see changes in the country, it's love and respect that's going to cause the positive changes. Nothing else can do it.
I really appreciate the comment respect, because most people have mixed and ambivalent feelings about the word love, and especially children. Love is a very confusing term. When parents say, I love you, and then turn around and hit them or abuse them, children are often very confused by that word. Most of the time they learn what love is not rather than what love is. So
I think that before there can be love, there first has to be respect.
Exactly.
Love is the MBA or whatever, but I believe that giving respect, and I believe it should be unconditional. I don't care who a person is, where he is, what he's done, or whatever. God wasn't out boozing when he decided to invent people. And he did make perfect human beings, but as I said many times, we have software problems, not people problems. So by giving a person unconditional respect, we're respecting the Creator.
Well, I think we need to really rethink how we see ourselves in children by exactly what you said. We have been taught to believe, our belief system is that somehow we are born broken, bad, not good, and this creates a level of low self-esteem right from the very beginning. And yet, as I just said earlier, when you look at a child, and when a child is a very young child, an infant, is brought into a room, they magnetize and create light in the room.
As soon as you mention a child or a baby, in fact, even before you mention, you automatically smile.
Exactly.
Because you can feel that the power in the word baby.
Exactly.
Small child. It just elevates your spirit.
Exactly. And yet, what we've come to believe is that somehow children are born broken and in need of our fixing, when in fact we are the ones in need of fixing. And it's obvious from the multi-billion-dollar industry in the self-help books that talks about the broken child and finding your childhood and finding your inner self and finding your inner child. Here we are as adults searching for that. And most of how this happens is through our educational system, by reinforcing the concept of our low self-esteem and our disrespect. Just the idea, I mean, there are just so many things. The idea that we really need to look at interpersonal skills. I noticed that I was at the Vice President Al Gore's conference on what he wanted in terms of the next generation, for what to look at for the 21st century, and that's lifelong learners. Well, I muse at that, because how many educators are lifelong learners?
Educators are really educated.
Lifelong
Some tough
learning.
questions were asked.
Lifelong learning is a concept that is basically foreign to most adults, who think that after they graduate from high school or college, that's the end of learning.
That's when it starts.
Exactly. I was musing the other. I wonder how many new things this teacher has learned. The concept of the Waldorf schools, Rudolf Steiner said that all teachers should be lifelong learners and never think that at any moment that they knew anything, and should learn along with their students. And the philosophy of Waldorf schools is that the teacher learns right along with the students. There are many concepts that the teacher knows, but she is always open to learning along with her students. And I think that's a key, critical concept to think of as a teacher, because as educators, and my degree is in education, so I'm one of those, we have been taught in our teacher training programs that we are the be-all and end-all and have all the answers, when in effect that's not true at all. So learning as a lifelong skill is absolutely important. what happens is that we know from statistical studies and research, nature always follows the model. Fish don't turn into birds. Acorn seeds don't turn into apples. So everything follows the model, and the same holds true for children. Whatever the model is what they become. Whether
put something in there, the
Sure.
model. I'm sure Jim's heard it before, but I think of the cat family. This mother cat, she had her back legs damaged, and she couldn't walk. So rather than put her to sleep, they decided to do the best. They loved the cat, and she later had kittens, and of course each kitten drug herself along exactly like the mother.
That's it.
So and the people, those of us who make money on television programs, whatever they are, well, there's no proof about this violence and everything else. That's so wrong. How about those kittens?
Exactly. We have found that most of the research shows, and there's a lot of research happening right now out at HeartMath, the Institute of HeartMath out in California, with regard to how environment directly affects genetic coding or interrupts genetic coding. They have taken actual DNA and forcefully created an environment that is nurturing and loving and literally has been altering DNA for the last 10 years. So, and these are scientists and physicians who are doing the research and documenting it all. They have been developing training programs for major corporations based on the model of what they call freeze frame, which is the ability for the mind to be able to relearn and redo old belief systems and patterns that have been set up every day and daily. And I have seen major corporations like Motorola and from all over the world fly their people in to relearn how to have interpersonal skills and to develop relationships with people unknown before.
Just want to remind our listeners we're talking with Dr. Daria Brezinski of the Earth Heart Foundation. This is Jim Spock with Bob Butts on Positive Press on the Air on WAAT Radio, 750 AM on your dial. And the same thing is happening today, Daria, that happened last time we had you on the show. I've taken like about 5 or 6 pages of notes, jotting down all these great things you're saying and things I want to follow up and bring back on. I know we had talked briefly before the show started about an event taking place at the end of this month, TV Turnoff Week, National TV Turnoff Week, which takes place from April 22nd to April 28th. And you had indicated that you'd wanted to make a few comments about the effects of television on children.
Yes, thank you. We talked before about how corporations tend to, and corporate America, use the schools as grounds for selling their products, and television happens to be one of those products. We place television in the classrooms, and we've been using television as a babysitter for our children for several generations now. And what we've discovered is, at Earth Heart, is that television has a dramatic effect on children. When you are watching television, you are in an alpha state. And in that state, all subliminal messages become reality. The same thing would hold true as if you were being hypnotized. And in the hypnotic state, you would be able to be given suggestions that would seem real to you. This is exactly what happens to children. Seeing violence on the television, the low morals, the sexuality, all of the subliminal messages on the advertising, these are all things that become incorporated in a child's brain and that in essence have an effect as absolute reality for the child. A child does not know that this is a make-believe world in the tube. To a child, the television is reality. And it is, in effect, it is much more than we possibly ever imagined. The effects of it and the dramatization of it are just absolutely extraordinary for children because they go out, as we said, nature follows the model. And when children see modeling behavior on television, they assume it to be a reality. I think we talked about this before in terms of the 1960s.
Right.
We had Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver and, all the other wonderful little programs that Ozzie and Harriet, how this was this make-believe little world of happy people who ended up being happy, never raised their voices, never had arguments, and everybody lived in La La Land. And now we have generations of adults who believe that to be true, and after 2 years of marriage, all of a sudden they have problems, they're arguing and fighting, and they can't imagine why they don't have what has been ingrained in them in terms of the television programming of the reality of life, which is arguing and fighting and often disagreements, and how to deal with those things. And those programs did not teach us the skills for being able to do that. They gave us a misperception of what reality was. And we took with us as children and now as adults that perception. So 2 years after the honeymoon is over and life is not as rosy as it was on television, we're wondering why, and we end up getting divorced and going from one relationship to another, thinking that somewhere along the line we're going to find this mystical, magical thing we saw on the television.
Then, of course, television in the 90s has gone to the opposite extreme, where the prototypical TV family is someone like The Simpsons.
Yes. Which is, if we look very closely at The Simpsons, what it does for children is it teaches us that mother and father are literally stupid and don't know anything about life, and the children are much smarter and know more about life than the parents. There is a disregard for authority figures that is conveyed in our programming in all levels, from the commercials to the movies to the television programming, a tremendous disrespect. Not to mention, we keep wondering why we have low morals and of our children, and the value system is no longer there. Children lie, they cheat, they steal. I find it intriguing. I work with a lot of parents and families, and the father will say, I can't imagine why my child is stealing from the store. They don't get that from us. And I say to the father, do you take pencils home from work and pens home from work? Do you use your online computer to chat on the internet? I said, that's all the same thing. You may not do it in terms of robbing a store, but you are in essence doing it from your employer. So what you are doing is the child knows that as a model, even though they do not observe it. At some point, you are saying to them that the stealing is okay because I do it, maybe not in the same way, but I do it in a different way. They see and hear their parents talking about cheating with the IRS or, whatever, not paying something or not paying full price for something or having gotten a steal. And these are the reflections that they see, and this is what they model. So we may think that we're not doing something or that we're doing a perfect modeling job for our children, when in essence, these little edges that we tend to cut and the things that we tend to do in our life, our children pick up on, and they become that model.
We've only got about 4 minutes left in the show. I can't believe the hour's gone by so quickly again. We're talking with Dr. Daria Brezinski of the Earth Heart Foundation. This is Jim Spock with Bob Butts on Positive Press on the Air. Daria, if you have a few closing comments you'd like to make today in the last few minutes, what would they be?
I'd like, if we can, to promote for Tuesdays from 10 to 11. Every Tuesday, this programming will now become Children Come First, and we'd like to thank Bob Butts and CK Auto for sponsoring it. It will be a call-in program. The number will be 570-457-7464, and we'd like to hear from the listening audience with your questions, with any problems that you might have that we might address, or any information that you need regarding this area. We have been in the state of Pennsylvania for the last year, and we're very familiar with things that are happening around the state and across the nation in terms of education, family issues, and our philosophy at Earth Heart Foundation is Children Come First. There is a lot of marketing going on in the world today about Children Come First, but it really isn't happening. We really mean that. We hope to be the voice for children everywhere, to help children and their families, especially the large majority of 50% of the parents who are divorced out there who are in need of help with their children. And anything that we can do to help you, we would greatly appreciate hearing from you. Again, the number is 570-457-7464. And you can call here and ask for the radio program. It will become called Children Come First, and we'd love to hear from you and give you any kind of information and assistance we can in the next few weeks.
Okay, I also want to mention that we did talk briefly about TV Turnoff Week. Let listeners know if there's any students or parents or teachers or concerned citizens want to get their communities or schools or church groups or whatever involved in TV Turnoff Week, you can contact Northeastern Pennsylvania Media Watch. The number is 823-0786. That's 823-0786. Or you can call us here at the Positive Press for more information on TV Turnoff Week, which takes place April 22nd through April 28th. Number of Positive Press, 457-3630. That's 457-3630. We've got about 1 minute left before we wrap up the show.
Put something in there along the lines you've been saying. I believe that one of the greatest gifts we can give to our children is to help them discover themselves. And I think that's what's going to build our self-esteem. And because we all need to do that, because most of us adults haven't really discovered the infinite wonder and credibility in ourselves.
Well, that's because what we need to help children discover is the fact that they are already whole all by themselves, and that we need to help them remember who they are.
Beautiful.
Okay, we just want to also remind our listeners that we'll be back on the air again tomorrow, of course, and our special guest tomorrow will be Karina Wood of the Hague Appeal for Peace, talking about an international peace conference that's taking place in Europe next month, and Bishop Desmond Tutu will be there, as well as Secretary General of the United Nations Kofi Annan, and also peace activists from all over the world. And that will be our show tomorrow on Positive Press on the Air. We're just about running out of time here. This is Jim Spock with Bob Butts, Positive Press on the Air. We'd like to thank Dr. Daria Brezinski of Earth Heart Foundation for being our guest today, and also remind you that starting on Tuesdays, next Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., and every Tuesday for the foreseeable future, we will have Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brezinski. Daria, thank you very much for being part of our show today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Your response to the Ministry of Teaching programs on WAAT keeps the Word of God in your car, at home, at work, on your AM radio. When responding, be sure to report hearing the program on WAAT 750. To keep remembering, please keep writing it down, WAAT 750. The time is approaching 11:01.
WAAT, a Fantasy Broadcasting Station, Oliphant, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, the Poconos, the new sound of radio in family service.